and thanks for joining us. And I did have a chance to put my tapestry up. So the world of bees, right? And all our amazing and interesting beekeepers from around the world, which really excited for our presenters this evening who have such diverse experience and have really been able to, I want to say, above and beyond just experiencing beekeeping, over time we synthesize things, right? We become, it's like an onion that gets these multiple layers. And over time you see things sort of come together, or things that are very distinct. And it makes us wonder, in a sense, and I quote Plato when I do this, or Socrates, who wrote about him, which is, what is a bee without her hive? Do we really know what a bee is? And so I'm so excited to welcome our presenters tonight. I know we're a little bit early, but I'm just kind of giving a pre-welcome to those who are already here, and very excited to just hear their experiences as they've come to know bees in so many different ways. So thank you all for joining us. And if you're already here, feel free to type in the chat where you're from, and I will introduce myself too. I'm Melanie Kirby. I'm serving as the Vice President of the Western Apicultural Society of North America, along with Etienne Tardif, who is our president. And we have a full board, not necessarily with us tonight, but who participate in helping to keep this organization going. And so in honor of those who have not only established WASP, but kept it going all these years, to now those of us who are sort of inheriting this organization and moving it forward, and with some wonderful mentorship from longtime beekeepers and members. This has really been a very, I want to say, exciting time in the history of WASP as it sort of embarks post-COVID, like so many other organizations and peoples and beekeepers even. I mean, I think maybe that should be one of our upcoming presentations, is like what has changed since COVID for beekeepers, from how you sell honey to how you do research even, and the folks who got shut down for a bit. But thank you so much. And this is, not knowing what this particular year would bring, or how COVID would come to either resolve or dissolve, or become an everyday part of life. WAS has ventured into this land of what I like to call Zoomlandia, where we get to all reconvene and still get to share space with each other, albeit cyber, and really just talk bees like we want to do. And so I almost feel like COVID, to a certain extent, has brought us closer together, right? And especially even now with the Western Apicultural Society holding monthly mini conferences, we get to see each other more often than we actually got to even in real life, pre-COVID. So it's not the same thing as being in person. We are really looking forward to when we can resume those at some point. And so we're just so glad to still be able to interact with you all and to have you here with us tonight. And I'm Melanie Kirby. I serve as the Vice President of the Western Apicultural Society, along with Etienne Tardif, who is our president, who is here but not here. He's here, but I know he's in a poor reception area. So very glad he's made an appearance and will hang with us until his reception drops. And very much excited to welcome our presenters this evening. We have Dr. Dewey Caron, who, not a story for this time, but I do like to call him my knight in shining, and my knight on a white horse in shining armor, who knows how to save the day and really be a true gentleman and leader and scholar within the field of apiculture. And also Julia Common, very excited to have Julia with us this evening as well. So we've got 2 continents represented, and so many different, I want to say, decades and experiences and hive visits in between. And so I'm going to go ahead, we're at 7:03. I'm going to go ahead and start with an introduction of our speakers. Dr. Caron will go first, and he will speak for about 45 minutes. Then we'll take a short little bio break as we switch presenters. And then we'll have Ms. Julia comment, and then she will be able to share her wonderful story with us, and then we will have Q&A afterwards. If you have comments that you would like to share, please by all means put them into the chat, and you can also direct your questions directly to the Q&A, which is a lot easier to kind of pool all the questions in one spot. And I know sometimes people pipe in questions that they're really asking like the public at large. And so feel free to put it in both if you'd like to do that. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce speaker number 1. That's Dr. Dewey Caron, and he will be talking about urban beekeeping south of the border. And then speaker 2, Julia Common, will be speaking about urban beekeeping north of the border. So here are their bios. Dr. Dewey M. Caron is Emeritus Professor of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology, University of Delaware, and Affiliate Professor, Department of Horticulture, Oregon State University. So he's a coast-to-coaster, which is really rare and just quite astounding in very positive ways. I enjoyed professional appointments at Cornell, 1968 to 1970. This is what he shares. The University of Maryland in 1970 to 81, and the University of Delaware from 1981 to 2009, serving as the entomology chair at the last 2. He retired from the University of Delaware in 2009 and moved to Portland, Oregon, or moved to, not removed. He moved to Portland, Oregon to be closer to the grandkids. And I'm so glad to have my own mother here to hang with the grandkids. I organized a WAS annual meeting and served as president of WAS in Salem, Oregon in 2010. And he served twice as the WAS director from Oregon and currently as a board member at large. And a very valued and much appreciated one, I will add to that. He represents WAS on Honeybee Health Coalition and is a principal author of the Honeybee Health Coalition Tools for Varroa Management and the Best Management Practices, or the BMPs. Since WAS's founding, he has attended, usually on the program, 12 plus years of WAS meetings. So he's a diehard for short. He's been president, chairman of the board, master beekeeper program advisor twice, and foundation chair and director of 2 states and most other functions for the Eastern Apicultural Society for over 35 years when he was on the East Coast. In retirement, he remains active in bee education, writing for newsletters, giving bee short courses, assisting in several master beekeeping programs, and giving presentations to local, state, and regional bee clubs. And he is, I want to say more recently, but it's been a few years, but it's still very, very much a newer reference guide that everyone should have on their shelf. He's the author of the Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping major textbook that's used in various university and association bee courses. And he also has a new bee book, which is his 10th, The Complete Bee Handbook, published by Rockridge Press in 2020. And last but not least, he has over 100 plus peer-reviewed scientific publications, over 400 popular press articles, and many extension publications, podcasts, videos, Facebook posts, you name it. Dr. Dewey Caron is very much active, as he mentioned before, and very much appreciated for all his efforts and dedication to the industry. And he conducts the Pacific Northwest Annual Loss and Management Survey for the past 10 years, and a pollination economics survey for the last 8. So he does a little bit of everything, and I want to say he's a Renaissance beekeeper in that sense. We also have Julia Common, who is a BCHPA certified instructor and member of the Canadian Association of Professional Apiculturists, and I will save the rest of her bio for when I introduce her, but let's just know it's going to be a South by North extravaganza this evening. So without further ado, go ahead, Dr. Caron.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Appreciate it very much. Pleasure to join you. As indicated, I am a member at large to the board of the WASP Association, which means if you have some things that are not being addressed, you'd like to have addressed, whatever, maybe I can help you as that member to the board. That as a member at large, I also serve on the executive committee where decisions are made in the interim between board meetings. We're going to talk about urban beekeeping, prospects and some challenges. I'm going to talk about, obviously, it's a little bit south of the border. We're going to start outside the country and come into the country. Is my PowerPoint up that everyone can see what is going on? Okay. This is Earth Week, and of course, Friday, we celebrate Earth Day, and we should include in, as we do, many of us do, somehow the bees and all of that, whether it's the habitat or whether it's aspect in terms of bees and beekeeping. Local group, we're having a extravaganza this coming weekend in celebration for Earth Day. So I hope many of you are involved somehow in your local communities with Earth Week or Earth Day. Urban beekeeping is not a new topic. Just for a reference, a long time ago, back in the 70s, I with Mike Burgett and John Ambrose published a chapter in a book on urban agriculture. Chapter 8 was on urban apiculture, and we're talking about some of the, again, the same challenges because many cities at that time had ordinances. And also the prospects of that as a possibility for beekeeping, backyard beekeeping. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has just established an Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production. It is a direct result from the 2018 Farm Bill. What they're doing is managing a competitive grants program. They're establishing a federal advisory committee with efforts by each of the county offices. County offices have been doing production agriculture, standard agriculture. So it's going to be interesting to see how many of these counties actually do adopt a specialist or have some expertise in urban agriculture. And again, they're going to try to develop material to help in urban aspects of agriculture, which we should insist includes our bees, although initially they are looking more at crop production. There's a website that is included for how to find that. London's bee population has tripled in the last decade to around 5,500 registered hives. London now thought to have the highest bee population of any city in Europe. We've seen those headlines, courtesy of some articles from The Guardian. In Paris, the number of hives in cities keeps growing. In Paris, for example, the number of registered hives has jumped up by a factor of 8 over the last decade. It's billed as good for nature. Many of you may well be aware that the hives that were on top of the Notre Dame Cathedral survived that particular fire. Those were hives that were owned and operated by a company, Beekeeping. I'll come back and talk just a little bit about that aspect. So those were not hives of an individual. This was a company serving corporate. Their main competitor there in the Paris urban area has this to say: from $500 to $3,000 annually per hive, urban beekeeping operations offer to install honeybee colonies on corporate or residential rooftops. The price includes regular checks on the bees, health perks like classes in biodiversity and beekeeping, and usually samples of ultra local honey. And often it is on the samples of, you might get a jar. The companies also pitch loftier benefits: the prospect of providing pollination for urban plants and creating a hedge against widespread losses in bee populations, while also providing companies green credibility in exchange for a small investment and a bit of rooftop. And we're going to talk a little bit as I go through the PowerPoint I have about individual or cooperative or cooperations involved in urban beekeeping, because it is part of this issue that we need to discuss in terms of our beekeeping. We're going to do a little bit of north and south. And so I think one of our questions is, how are we going to define urban beekeeping? We can call it as agriculture, urban agriculture, our specialty with our own organism. We can call it hobbyist or individual pursuit versus corporate business efforts. We can call it a conservation effort. And this particular slide is very south of the border. This is from Bolivia. That is, the gentleman is the past president of the British Columbia. And we're going to have British Columbia being emphasized Yeah, and then the northern part of this, the second part. So let's come back to the shores and talk a little bit about some of the cities where we have some of this beekeeping. Boston, cities are vibrant environments for pollinators. Cities offer bees a surprisingly diverse choice of pollen-bearing plants among parks, playgrounds, backyards, street trees, and median strips. There's a growing urban agriculture movement turning empty lots and rooftops into lush garden habitat. The illustration is from Best Bees, one of the companies that is offering this corporate effort for beekeeping. Cities initially had various types of restrictions or ordinances, specific ordinances against beekeeping. New York City opened up in 2000 to the possibility of having bees within the city. Chicago 2011, Boston 2014, and Washington as well. Obviously, there was beekeeping in these cities prior to that. It was mostly not permitted, or it was stealth beekeeping, not openly having bee colonies available that others could see or complain about.
Dewey,
New York,
just I
yes,
apologize. Looks like your slides are stuck. They're stuck
Doc.
on the Paris slide right now.
Huh, I'm well along to New York here on mine.
You want to just do a refresh on your share? See if it restarts it?
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, I was just about to ask about that.
Okay, I was on to,
I mean, I saw the Paris one and then it got stuck on the one.
Paris. Okay, all right. Let me go back to Paris. Can you see that now full screen? Whoops, came to New York. Huh. Are you seeing what's on the screen now? Anything? Are you seeing my?
It looks like your working section. Before, when you clicked on it, it came up real big. And then if you want to push slideshow start from this slide,
Okay,
wherever you'd like to start.
It should be good
okay.
now.
All righty.
So up at the top, see where it says slideshow? Couple after transitions, animations, and then
Current slide. Okay, so that should be Paris. And then this quote that I gave you relative to the individual versus corporate urban beekeeping. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing, now you're seeing this one with
issues
with our president from British Columbia?
Yes.
Clark.
Yep, Clark, right. Okay, and Boston?
Yeah.
So the photo here for is from Best Bees in Boston. So I guess we're back on track. I indicated the cities when they legalized beekeeping within the cities, starting with New York City in 2000, Boston and Washington most recently in 2014. In New York, bees are thriving in New York hives. The city offers them a welcome variety of flowers and fewer pesticides than on rural farms. And many of us have had some sort of an interaction with Andrew Cote, who is the bee guy, who has an individual has helped populate the various boroughs of New York City with bees and beekeepers as well. Washington, D.C., only more recently, in 2014, just 8 years ago, permitted bees within the city, but they had bees there were beekeepers in the city. The Maryland beekeepers had a contingent from Washington, D.C. But even prior to that, 2009, Charlie Brantz established a beehive on the White House lawn at the urging of Michelle Obama with the gardens that she had planted there. The reason he could put one, or the president could put one on the White House grounds, was that White House grounds were federal property and not subject to the regulation of the city of not permitting bees within the city. So that's an unusual workaround. Chicago, coming a little bit towards the west, Chicago is one of the greatest cities for urban beekeeping around the world. The greater Chicago area is estimated to have over 7,000 honeybee hives. City Hall boasted beehives years before proclaiming the practice officially legal in 2011. And you can see Mike Thompson here, who has been taking care of those colonies. These are hives that are on top of the roof of the Chicago City Hall. Others, Houston, Los Angeles, and more closer to the West Coast here, Seattle and Portland, also have had changes in their law permitting now a wider acceptance, a wider possibility of having city bee colonies within their city. There have been some other issues that have been raised relative to, however, to putting hives in urban areas. For example, Andrew Turner, another of the Guardian correspondents, says, honeybees are voracious. Is it time to put the brakes on the boom in beekeeping? He was talking mostly in that case about aspects of the London information and also in some of the other English cities. A second, why some ecologists worry about rooftop honeybee programs. This was in Wired by Jennifer Bell. And finally, bee culture, more recently, Dal Peters had urban beekeeping, maybe not a great idea. Now, there has not been an awful lot of research to support some of those aspects. There is a little bit, so I have a few that are here. A study with Ropars, et cetera, in +1 from 2019, looking at Paris, noted that there were negative effects on other pollinators in terms of the data that they were able to collect. A Swiss study challenging the suitability of urban beekeeping by a pair of authors noted that in the Swiss cities, they looked at 14 of them. The numbers in 12 of the 14 cities had increased, and the median increase was a whopping 69%. They looked as well in those cities at urban growth suitability, and they found it to be inadequate. That they felt that in the cities that they were able to do some measurements, these were 8 of them, the carrying capacity had been exceeded, in some cases vastly exceeded, by the number of colonies that were in the city. I might indicate that their UGS measurement was actually not then ground truth as to what they were looking at that was green. So it could have been habitat that was not at all suitable. It was just something that was appearing green in the maps that they were using. Leah Lagasse did a PhD thesis back in 2016 looking at Paris again, the United Kingdom. She looked in a study of 881 colonies, found that urban areas have lower overwintering mortality rates and higher honey production than colonies installed in the surrounding rural area. So this was the effect, was her study that she was doing. Another one, Bladek, 2019 from Natural Ecology and Evolution, again based in the United Kingdom. Urban land uses can support substantial pollinator populations. Household income was positively associated with pollinator abundance in gardens. So some of the research is catching up in terms of this urban aspect. One final one, Stevenson in 2020, again from the UK. In a large part of the city, the existing resources are insufficient to maintain the current number of honeybees. Now, some of these these are all peer review articles. So these are all based on research that was available that the authors conducted in their work. So bees flying over the city, what are some of the positives? What are some of the negatives? Are there some real benefits to bees or the communities? The studies, mites, no. City urban bees have just the same issues with mites. Is there less pesticide exposure, as a couple of studies have seemed to indicate? Maybe. Is there less swarming by colonies that are urban versus more rural location? No, there is no evidence. How about improved overwintering capabilities? And one study certainly indicating that. I'm going to show you a bit of data that I have that indicate that it's an open question. Greater honey production, again, at least one supporting paper that would say yes. So others that have either not measured it or are not claiming that there is an increased honey production. So label that maybe as a maybe. Enhance environmental justice. Again, some research support for that, so that perhaps we can label that as an advantage. Disease, no studies that I could find, but probably not a difference in terms of the bacterial, nosema disease, etc. How about city beekeepers? Often you will use different hive styles. And of course, we have a big debate. Do different hive styles help with aspects of honey production, aspects of mite production? I'll again show you just one piece of evidence on that that would indicate no, that it's not the different hive styles of urban beekeepers that might make an advantage. And the better floral diversity, again, a number of studies indicating that yes, or a likely yes, that this might be an advantage of bees that are in urban areas. Of course, the question is this native flora versus is this introduced? And of course, in urban areas, a lot of it's going to be introduced flora, and the honeybee being a weedy species taking advantage of it. I indicated one of my activities that I've been doing. So during this month, I do a survey of Pacific Northwest honeybees, both their losses and their management. This is found at pnwhoneybeesurvey.com. This is a look at a beekeeping group that's in the urban area. I get around 55 different responses from the members. You can see that in that urban area, they have around 12% of non-traditional hives, here shown as top bar hives and rarity hives. Of the category other, 2 of the 5 other categories were a non-traditional type of hive. I think the other 3 were longitudinal hives. So that in an urban area, it does seem that there is a higher advantage, a higher number of non-traditional hives, the top bar and wary hives. When we look at then at the loss levels, I measure both commercial beekeepers and backyard beekeepers. So the green line at the bottom with the numbers is our loss levels going back to the 12 years I've been doing the survey. You can see the commercial beekeepers in the state of Oregon have lower losses by about 1/2 the losses of the urban beekeepers. The backyard beekeepers, individuals with less than 50 colonies. That's this orange trace that's in the middle with their numbers. This number is around 40% on average. The number of commercial losses on average in Oregon beekeepers for the last dozen years has been 20%. This is that trace for the last group that I mentioned that I showed the previous data slide. This is for this group of the Portland urban beekeepers. So this group is the one that has the more non-traditional, higher percentage non-traditional hives. And you can see the blue trace here, their losses have been higher. So the urban area, as least expressed in this particular survey, our urban area beekeepers are having higher level losses than our backyard beekeepers in general, and certainly higher than our commercial beekeepers that are in much rural areas. So this is at pnwhoneybeesurvey.com. Well, let me give a flavor in terms of some of the local urban programs, and I know all of you can do this for the nearest city, or you are in a city that you might do for yourself from your local area. We had an individual that started local honey and was actually selling honey by local communities within the city of Portland. This was then bought out by another company, Jacobson Salt Company, and they have a hive program. Through the Jacobson hive program, we source, deliver, and install bees and beehives to local residences and businesses. We offer maintenance and harvesting, as well as educational classes and consulting. So this is their effort. Then they also then sell locally produced products. So here's one of their 6-ounce containers, Jacobson Salt Company. Another aspect that they're doing, so here's the major beekeeper for this group. One of their efforts is rewilding area where they were doing some shipbuilding along the Willamette River. So this is a former spot for manufacturing. The shipbuilding, it was barges, went out, was relocated. And so you can see this company, Jacobson, is rewilding that area by installation and taking care of the colonies there. Now they're taking care of it because then they're going to sell honey by source. In this case, they're selling Willamette Valley honey from Oregon. This happens to be their raw blackberry blend from the Willamette Valley. Blackberries are a major source around here. So there are a number of individuals, in that case a company, that are doing this within the urban area here at Portland. Here's a second example. This is Bridgetown Bees. Bridgetown Bees is owned by a longtime beekeeper, so Glenn Andreessen. Glenn Andreessen, in his yard, obviously very urban, is offering a beekeeping class. This is actually through one of our community colleges. Glenn sells nukes and sells package bees, has an outlet for bee supply equipment as well as the bees themselves, offers the courses, and then he actually puts colonies in backyards of people that are asking for colonies to be in the yard, and it's all part of his production. And he has been doing this now for 30 years. So all of us could give examples of urban beekeeping of individuals such as Glenn or individual companies that are trying to promote their product as a local product. In Seattle, I brought out this one example. Woodland Bee Company is based in the Ballard neighborhood. They work with folks who love bees but need assistance in proper beekeeping. We have hives all over the city on roofs, the Columbia Center, and the Google campus. Again, just another example from, in this case, from Seattle, of individual, a company that sells nukes and packages and bee supplies, is locating bees throughout the city, again, so that they will then have a product that is somewhat marketed as local to a community, or at least to that particular part of the city where they're located their bees. And then now expanding to help others that want to have assistance with bees with their bee colonies themselves. However, urban areas have become a real hotbed for those that want to locate colonies and take care of them for a fee, using pretty much companies and corporate sponsors, not so much individuals, and not so much necessarily helping individuals be beekeepers, but they themselves are keeping bees. So for Best Bees, here are 4 of their locations in which they have located colonies and are doing this corporate program with them in a rather expanding number of cities across the United States. So what they will do as a company, they will go ahead and put an installation of colonies, help you choose an ideal location to establish 1 or more beehives at your home or workplace. They will do the maintenance. Passionate and experienced beekeepers service your beekeepers once a month, providing high quality care and detailed reports for the individual or for the corporate. Harvesting, they'll harvest, but then the individual will keep 100% of the raw honey produced. We'll handle the rest, small batch extraction, bottling with personalized labels. And they're also using this in terms of helping to develop some research, which is attractive to the corporate entities. At every visit, we collect data and share it with our research partners to enhance the science of beekeeping and improve the health of pollinators worldwide. They are very, very aggressive in expanding. In a number of our bee clubs out here, they advertised this year seeking part-time beekeepers in the Portland area. And there was a similar one in the Seattle area, for example. We are a full-service beekeeping operation headquartered in Boston. We deliver, install, and manage beehives for residents and businesses in 22 cities nationwide, including the Portland metro area. The data we collect via our hive visits support honeybee health research at our sister nonprofit, the Urban Beekeeping Laboratory and Bee Sanctuary. Our beekeepers are managed from the Boston office, and we offer flexible scheduling to accommodate your schedule. Ideally, candidates will be available for at least 2 to 4 beekeeping groups per month, though more frequent scheduling may be available. We offer a competitive hourly rate, seeking beekeeper to start as soon as possible. They then have a listing of ideal candidate qualifications. They have hired now in the Portland area 2 different individuals to be the beekeeper, and then they bought bees from Bridgetown Bees this year, from Nuke Bees, to establish this particular program. You can read the entire qualifications and what they're looking for. You got to have a driver's license. You have to have your COVID vaccinations, etc. At this particular website. A second company is based out of Toronto, Canada. Montreal, Canada. Montreal-based Alveola was founded in 2013. They operate an estimated over 3,000 beehives for 600 companies in 20 North American cities, including New York, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, and Toronto. Backed by Edo Capital, a venture capital fund, Alveola charges an average of $2,000 a year per hive, offering its corporate clients a package, including candle making courses and branded souvenir honey. They are expanding into Europe with Beekeeping. Now, I mentioned Beekeeping was the company that was running those hives, managing the hives on the top of the cathedral, the Notre Dame Cathedral that burned, although the hives themselves did not. This has a full-time person stationed in Seattle, and then he operates 3 beekeeping individuals in Seattle and 2 in the Portland area. So Best Bees has bees here in Portland and in Seattle, and as does this particular company. And this one even then has an interim level of management. Curiously, he does not hire these individuals to do the work. This is a shot of the bees on a rooftop in Seattle. It was pasting on the line there. He does actually not do the hiring. Corporate does the hiring, but he is then responsible for performance of the individuals that are hired. So this is a whole new venture, and you can see most of these companies have been established within the last 10 years, and all of them have some sort of funding that is not based on necessarily just bees and beekeeping, but their major outreach is to corporate companies, not so much just the bees in the backyard so that they can have a local honey, but basically in terms of all of the advantages that bees might offer a company or the employees of the company, and then they're working with that company. This one is partnered with one of the major sources for finding office space in cities, this particular company. Lastly, let me segue to one final aspect, and that is, like many of our cities, there have been issues relative to restrictive ordinances, issues with individuals coming across and being afoul of nuisance statutes, etc. And we in Oregon were faced with some of the very same things. So with a new effort by the legislature of the state of Oregon to place a bee pollination specialist at our state university, at Oregon State University, they also directed that person to, with the Department of Agriculture and other appropriate entities, stakeholders, to develop guidelines, best management practices for keeping bees in residential areas. So we have developed this residential beekeeping best practice guidelines for nuisance-free beekeeping. Now, we can define the ordinances as very specific language that might include how far to set back colonies from a property line, how many to be on a property, where fencing might be relative to the colonies, and others, water availability, etc. But even without having restrictive ordinances, beekeepers in urban areas can be subject to nuisance statutes. So a nuisance we can define, or we are defined by statute in the state of Oregon, as an unreasonable or unlawful use of property that results in material annoyance, inconvenience, discomfort, or injury to another person or to the public, usually remedied by abatement or some effort to end that particular nuisance. So you might be within any legal restrictions. You might be within guidelines if there are such guidelines within a city, but then still subject to your bees being cited in nuisance. Restrictions are limitations which cannot be exceeded or rules which cannot be broken. So as an effort to help define bees and beekeeping, and the fact that cities in Oregon, as elsewhere in the US in the early 2000s, were changing their ordinances, were dropping legal restrictions, but still, of course, had these nuisance restrictions. The House Bill 2653 then helped direct, along with companion House bills, that there be a specialist, and one of the first activities of that specialist would be then to develop this effort so that there would be a best management practice that cities could then rely upon, rather than just simply dropping a legal restriction, language that would say things such as setbacks or how many colonies, rather than just simply dropping that they then had a fallback position that they would then have beekeepers doing best management practices. So this was developed with that in mind. So here's our publication. It is called EM 9186. Is from a publication of the Cooperative Extension Service from Oregon State University. In this, actually, we're going to have the second half with Julia, and in this we actually have some comments about her particular program. Even have one of the photos from the Chicago City Hall in this, finding what is urban beekeeping, basically. And so the publication is directed towards a series of learning objectives, 7 of them. It should, by looking at this and following what are mentioned as our best management practice, you should be able to locate your apiary to minimize nuisances. You should be able to judge how many colonies you should place on a property. 3, you should know how and when to provide water. 4, it emphasizes reducing swarming through an understanding of swarm biology. We want to have beekeepers understand how they can minimize defensive behavior in their inspections in their apiary, educate neighbors about bees, and finally, how that they might respond to a citation, one of these nuisance citations, or if they are afoul of a legal requirement in terms of bees. So we go through each of these various components that we believe are part of a best management practice. So one of them is arranging colonies, flight path, and barriers, looking in terms of keeping bees flying above the head of people walking on a sidewalk, people walking in the city along a building, etc. Information in terms of, what is a good site, and then how can we make that site less obstructive for neighbors, for those that are around our bees. We have a section in terms of colony numbers, what might be appropriate for colony numbers in an environment. We have a section that also talks about the last one that I mentioned. If you do get that citation in nuisance, one of the things with a nuisance citation is that it is a effort to try to change the nuisance. It is not then citing, you know, you cannot keep bees. It's how are we going to make your beekeeping so that it is not a nuisance to the complaint of an individual or neighbors. So some of our practical advice in terms of a citation response is to remain calm, know the law. What is it that says that your particular community says? And again, a number of the communities have dropped any restrictions completely. You need to have records of your own beekeeping, and that you are doing due diligence. And so this best management practice is a good place to start with all that. Then we have expert help. And so rather than going it alone and going in cold or going in hot-headed or whatever way might be a response, is to contact the state beekeepers and association, and we have individuals within the association that then can then be an advocate for you to go before any governmental board, or to help you be prepared so that you may go before a governmental board, the agency that has issued the nuisance citation, etc. Then we're going to try to counsel that nuisance statute is an effort to change something that is going on. So a neighbor that has an irritation that is being bothered by your bee colonies, what can be done to make that particular change? And with nuisance statutes, you do have appeal rights in almost all cases, so that you can then become in compliance and no longer keeping your bees in a manner that creates a nuisance. So again, not going alone, and then coming up with good hard facts and your own efforts in terms of what you've been doing in your beekeeping so that your bees do not become a nuisance. So this is a resource. This is our residential beekeeping. It is available for all. And I'd like to say that this PowerPoint that I have developed with the references is available for anyone to use. And we have a separate PowerPoint on residential beekeeping that then follows our publication that I can also send to anyone that would be interested in using it. That concludes my comments, and I wanted to stop with enough time so that we might have some time to start some question and answers before we have Julia and a break and Julia.
Thanks, Dewey. And let me see here. Let me get back to.
I'll stop sharing so we can see some of us.
Always chock full of information, never a dull moment. Thank you so much, because I feel like you covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. And we have we have a few comments, and then we have a couple questions in the Q&A, and maybe I will start. We also even had one emailed in, so I will pull that up too. One of the questions is from Dr. Nasser. Dewey, would you consider urban beekeepers having high bee kill that could be associated with years of experience?
In the effort that I've done with the Pacific Northwest survey, as you increase your number of colonies, your percentage loss goes down, as you might expect. As you increase the numbers of years of experience, your ability to keep colonies alive, in other words, having fewer losses, increases. So experience does seem to make it that you're going to lose fewer colonies. And as your colony numbers increase, likewise, you lose fewer colonies. So that's the result from the survey of the last dozen years. So I would say yes.
Yeah, and that's, if we can get over that hump, because those initial years, you kind of have that so-called experience of beginner's luck sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And then things get very real. If you can make it over that hump, then it's also still how much are you able and willing and interested in really pursuing more you know, to a certain extent, we want to say more torture some years, but no, there's good years and bad years. And I think there's something to be said about that, because if folks think it's going to be easy, it's really not. You know, you have to invest more time in order to, again, like I mentioned, get over that hump and see where it leads. Another question we have here is that, let's see here. We've got a few different ones. We've got one here that's, so Daniel Schoenthal, I hope I'm saying that correct, from California says, we see very high rates of loss in the first year, so 60% or more within their members. So that's a clue. So just, you know, adding to that conversation. He also says, nice, go OSU. And you've got a lot of gratitude on the chat too. We also have a question from Lindsay Frank. How do you deal with bee poo on windows?
That is an urban issue, as well as it's an urban issue located in rural areas alongside solar panels, for example, and our new modern farming in many rural areas. I don't think there's any magic way to do that. In most cases, it is a matter of a short period of time in spring, or hopefully it's only a short period of time in spring. I dealt way back with a case where Beekeepers was located to a new car dealer. And when the new car dealer finally discovered what was the source of all those yellow spots that had to be washed off the new cars in the morning, the beekeeper went from 10 colonies in his backyard down to 2, and it kind of eliminated the problem. So part of that is numbers, certainly.
Right, most definitely.
Yeah.
So with the numbers, and one comment on the bee poop, which was, don't buy a white bee truck like I did, says Daniel.
Indeed.
Another question is, you know, what are the top 5 urban complaints? And then is it worth it?
Is it worth to be an urban beekeeper? I don't, it would be just something off the top of my head, whether the top 5 complaints. Our issue we find in many communities, and this is going back to Long Island, for example, back in the, when I was finishing at Cornell back in the 60s, we're having a domino effect of one community developing a very restrictive ordinance against beekeeping, and then a neighboring community then doing the same thing, and then a neighboring community doing the same thing. So the beekeepers of the Long Island Bee Club came up with a series of what we didn't call them, but were then best management practices. And by eventually being able to develop that and distribute that among their members, they were able to halt that domino effect of different communities coming up with very restrictive ordinances. What we find in many cases, and this is a generalization, is that one individual has an issue with a neighbor who is the beekeeper, and that one individual complains to an elected official at some level, and then the elected official then proposes some sort of a restrictive ordinance, and that's the other domino effect from all of this. And then the person that is agreed, often the neighbor that makes the complaint to the elected official, then will very vociferously complain, and so then the elected individuals of that governmental agency, then rather than dealing with the individual issue of one beekeeper, one neighbor, seek to legislate in one form or another how many bees, how far from a property line, no bees in this city, those type of restrictions that may occur. It can be very much handled with a nuisance. And so it may, in fact, be the fact that the bees are right on the property line, and the individual beekeeper, to keep them away from his kids and his deck in his backyard, puts them very much on his property line, but right on the property line of a neighbor, something of that nature. Or it may be colony creep, where the beekeeper starts with one colony, captures a swarm, makes a split, and then so in 3 or 4 years, they've now got a backyard of 6 colonies, not just 1 colony, and then creating more of issues with that. So there are a number of ways in which these do come about. I will say, since we have developed the residential beekeeping material, that has served in 2 communities so far to, one, roll back restrictive ordinances, and in the second, to help prevent the community from developing restrictive ordinance or a restrictive ordinance, because it can indicate that in both cases, the beekeeper who was the source of the issue in that community did cite that they were following the best management practices as developed by originally by edict of the Oregon State Legislature. So it has served a purpose, and I think down the road we will continue to see that particular approach as being beneficial for these issues that are short of the nuisance issue.
So do you think it's worth it?
We did. We had stakeholder input from beekeepers, obviously, as well as the communities, a couple of community administrators. And so when we developed the ordinance, if it's not something strictly that is done, let's say, by the beekeepers, but is done with this input, I think it was worth the time and effort that we put into it. Yes. That is freely downloadable, and I see that Carrie has put in the source for that, the catalog of extension in the chat as well.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
I'm not sure why someone said they tried to go residualbeekeeping.org page and was not able to do so. So I'm not sure what was going on with that, because I did check all of these just very recently.
Cool. Okay, so a few comments about things. One about an upper limit for the number of hives you can keep, and provided you have a very large roof. And I would just add to that, provided you have, what available forage in the area, but also your local regulations, right? So they should check with their local extension office.
Well, but they're not. I don't think their local extension office is going to be able to help them very much. Or now with the initiative with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, those local offices for U.S. Department of Agriculture, at least initially, I don't think are going to be able to help them very much. We wrestle with this.
I think you're right. The federal ones might be more difficult, but your local ones through whatever your ag university is.
If we have anyone with ag so example in state of Maryland, the Baltimore is a particular county, so they have an extension office for Baltimore City, and then around it is another Baltimore County, and they have an extension agent. In the city, they do not have anyone that does any agriculture, or have not. This may change now with the USDA initiative. Baltimore County has, I think, had so I'm going back now a couple dozen years, had at least 3 agents, one for animals, one for crops, at least 2 agents that were handling agriculture. So, so these people in urban areas, yes, they have often very strong 4-H programs. They have the programs that are directed towards bicycle safety and some of the others that Extension is working with. But to date, I would say relatively few cities have anyone that has any agricultural expertise that would be in the cooperative extension office. Let's hope that will change.
Dewey. That's a really great point. And you're absolutely right. We see it here, even in New Mexico, within our Department of Ag, we don't have anybody who's specific. We don't have an apiculture specialist. We have a person who is in what they call entomology nursery industries. But the bees are very bottom of the list because we're just not a high honey producing state,
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely right. On a local level, people are going to be looking to the organizations, and that's actually even where WAS can serve as a resource, at least for education, for folks across the across the, West. What is it? We're at 11 provinces and states that are included in WASP,
And wasps like
including
that, yeah.
Canada and Mexico. So yeah,
To the
there's
question that Flip had, how many?
Mhm.
Just as in our rural area, for example, if a commercial beekeeper came to you and said, how many bees can I stock in an apiary and still have them, each of them, be able to store enough resources, let's say, to get through winter or give me some honey production. We're at a loss to be able to have a very intelligent answer to that question in the rural areas. And we've not started any research in that in terms of the urban area at all. So there is, so how many hives in a backyard, how many on a rooftop, how many on a corporate campus. We have no research, so we're in the infancy of even trying to come up with that type of a question. The Swift study, for example, looked at urban green spaces, the UGSs, and again, it was just using Google Maps to see what was green. They did not then go ground truth it. Did that green have any plants, anything planted there that was of benefit to bees at all? They did not do that. So that is the first of the nature of its study, but we've really got to see what's in those green spaces. Is it just mowed lawn? Is it a few struggling plants in a vacant lot? Exactly what is it that is that green space, and then how much may these urban green spaces support bee colonies?
Yeah, and that's really what it does come down to, because even regardless of what can typically be the norm, I mean, some books will say certain sort of, I want to call them, hard and fast figures, like a ratio of how many acres per colony, especially for pollination sufficiency. And I think sometimes too, it just really depends on what else is around there. Most definitely, what's the available forage, what's that nutrition, is there an extension of season, is there just only one bloom event and then it's a food desert? You're right, it can all change. The landscape really really is a part of that conversation, because it's going to vary. It's not necessarily a magic number.
No, and among the commercials, their stocking rates. So can this spot take, let's say, 6 pallets, 24 colonies, or is this spot good for 10 pallets? Can I put 40 pallets there, 40 colonies, or can I put 72 colonies there? So that's how they kind of determine their stocking rate. And really, when we talk about carrying capacity, we're talking about spring pollen, because that's what turns colonies around. Honey production, which may be a very different figure than spring pollen, and then for fall stocking of getting enough honey in the colonies to overwinter. So the carrying capacity for number of bee colonies an area an apiary might support really is not a figure. It is at least those 3 different figures, depending on time of year.
You're right. I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll do a quick bio break and switch to Julia, and then whatever other questions come through, maybe you can review them in the chat. So somebody had mentioned about the restricted password on residential beekeeping, and I did put a correct link in there. This question: could you speak to the potential for vandalism or intrusion into unobserved hives on urban sites?
Again, we don't really have much in the way of information. Off the top of my head, I would indicate that because these are in many cases occupied residences, although in some cities we know they're putting them into vacant lots in abandoned properties. The level of vandalism is probably not much different than from more rural locations, particularly pollination sites. I do know, however, in Detroit, there's been a major effort to bring bees into the city of Detroit using abandoned properties. And the general rule of thumb is that unless there is a fence around that particular property, there's a very high probability that they're going to experience vandalism. So it is both in our urban and rural properties. I don't know that it is greater or reduced, whether it's urban versus rural. There's no to indicate one way or the other.
Could I speak to that one?
Please.
You know, it's a really interesting question, because it shows when you have bees in cities and in community areas that you really need to be on the ground with the community, that they buy into the bees, and that when you're not there, they have eyes on the hives for you. And this is where it becomes very personal, because you're improving in a neighborhood or being in the neighborhood and you get people on board, and then you don't have the vandalism. So I know that our bees, when they were in a downtown east side, you would expect them to have been vandalized. They weren't, because everyone had their eyes on the hives and they cared about them. They respected the bees. So
Thank you, Julia. Very important.
Yeah, that's a great segue, Julia, because that's part of it, you know, and at the root of all of it, and why any of us are even here on this conversation and in this webinar, is that we care, we're interested, we're in the process of developing our relationship with the bees, and hand in hand with that also goes developing a relationship with the environment in which they're in, and in their landscape, and in the, you know, what I almost call the atmosphere, right? Everything that the bees come in contact within that space. So let's do a quick, we'll say, you know, 5-minute bio break. And I hope everybody's back in their comfy chair with their monitor open or their phone in their hand. And we will now get into Julia and her presentation, which I'm very excited for. And I have to actually share, I didn't mention this to you, Julia, but I actually remember meeting your daughter at a British Columbia Honey Producers Association meeting in 2013, I think. It was a while ago. And I just remember hearing the story about Hives for Humanity, and really just feeling the swell of pride in not only the human connection to bees, but what that means to be a steward of bees, and the fact of all the really blessed work that you've been doing with homeless people, which is a sector of our population which we tend to, you know, in general ignore or bypass. And so I just want to say that you've always held a special spot in my memory of wonderful beekeepers I've met, and beautiful programs and outreach that they're doing. So very excited to share about Julia. And she is a BCHPA, or British Columbia Honey Producers Association certified instructor and member of the Canadian Association of Professional Apiculturists. Julia has been involved in beekeeping since her university days, and what started as a summer job became first a hobby and later a career. From 2012 through to 2019, she acted as Chief Beekeeper for the Vancouver-based Society of Hives for Humanity, which she co-founded along with her daughter, Sarah Comet. Urban beekeeping has led her to several epiphanies concerning the health and welfare of both bees and humans. Pollination work has led her to focus on how to better the conditions under which we expect our bees to live and work. She is passionate about bees and teaching, and she has participated in a number of research projects over the past decade. Since her retirement from Hives for Humanity, in 2019, Julia has built Bees Actually to include nuke and honey sales, both greenhouse and field pollination, consulting, presenting, and teaching. And we are so happy to have her here sharing the urban beekeeping - north of the border perspective. So without further ado, Julia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. It's always so interesting to listen to these bios. I think, God, who is that person? Oh yeah, it's me, right? Yeah, it sounds also funny. Anyway, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for those kind words. And Dewey, everything you said was so organized and so wonderfully scientific. And I'm just so like crazy the opposite. So I hope that what I do makes sense. Every time I look at this, I change the order. So good luck, everybody. You're in for one of my rides. I don't know what's going to happen either. So I'm really happy to be here, nervous, excited, all those things. I just like to say that to start off with, that I live and I work my bees in the Vancouver area on the west coast of British Columbia. And this is the traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples. And that I would say that and think about that and often think about it in a deeper way, changing perspectives that we have these days. And it's kind of what I'm going to talk about tonight is sort of like a cautionary tale, urban beekeeping cautionary tale, and about perspectives and how people see things. Same hives seen from a different perspective. It's quite, I like that. This is in Oslo, on the Opera House in Oslo. So I've been at this, I got to reduce my, sorry, I'm being distracted by my screen. I've been at this quite a long time. And this is me back in when I was 21, working for Lloyd Harris, doing his population study work, marking bees. And I didn't have a clue what was going on in a colony. I just knew that they were just, I was hooked. I loved them. And often I still have a hard time figuring out what's going on in the colony, but there it is. It's the wonder of beekeeping. And I have lots of changes in thinking over the years, and some things, so my thing stuck too. Like Dewey's got stuck. Some things remain the same. You know, bees remember the last visit. Bees remember how you treat them. Bees, it's good to have everything sort of bee tight so your bees don't get used to getting into places where you don't want them to be. You always have the option to stop beekeeping, close the calling down, walk away for a little while and get your nerves back up if you're having difficulty. I must say that, well, when I'm talking tonight, I'm thinking I'm talking to, I hope, some urban beekeepers, and often urban beekeepers are new at this thing of beekeeping. So I'm trying to, the Oregon document that Dewey talked about is a fantastic document, and it's really comprehensive. And so I will try to add a few little other things to it that aren't in there. So you need to trust yourself. You need to trust your bees. And if you're working with people, you need to trust the people you're working with bees. And this is one of the wonderful things. It's it forms such a bond when you're working with somebody. 1, 2, 3, up, you go with that box. And if one of you drops it, it's just not going to be great. So trust your people. Know your limits if you can. Often when you start beekeeping, you don't think you do have any limits, but as you come more and more into the beekeeping, you realize, oh yeah, there are limits to what I can get done in a day. And also that the faster your bees are moving, or if you've got some sort of the bees are getting agitated, the slower the beekeeper needs to move. You need to be focused and actually efficient in your work, but calm and focused and working. And it's wonderful, and I would think imperative in the city, in the urban setting, to have gentle bees. So this is sort of a story is my experience, and it's, I think, kind of the feel and the vibe that I'm feeling around as I'm going to conferences, as I'm talking to people in the cities and outside the cities. You know, country life is, as I grew up, I'm 68, so I've been in this time when, you know, fresh air was, it was just fresh air. There was water. Water wasn't an issue. Clean water, peaceful, it was safe in the country. Birds, bees, nature. It was just this wonderful place to be. And that's when I began my beekeeping. I was in the country, typical setting, blackberries, just having a calm time with the bees, a couple of people there looking in at a colony. And then it was Sarah who called me into the city. She said, Mom, would you teach me how to beekeep? And I said, yeah. And she said, but I want to do it in the downtown east side of Vancouver because I feel they could really enhance the life of the people down there. So it's Sarah who does the social work. Sarah, you know, I have left Hives for Humanity. Honestly, I found the intensity in the city with the people very, very hard to take. And so it's Sarah who's carrying that torch and doing that work now, not me. I actually never had a clue that anything was going to happen like this. I just brought the bees down to the city. So what was the most amazing thing for me in the city, I had not been in the city, was that instead of the bees starving, instead of the bees being trashed and vandalized by people, people loved them the moment they came in, and those bees completely thrived. And then the people looking after them also thrived. It was like miraculous, really. There were rats and noise, everything around there, and yet this gorgeous colony growing, beautiful, beautiful honey, and oh man, it was totally delicious. So that's how that Hives Humanity, and that's how it started, that I ended up in the city. And the same time that I was in the city, I had bees in the country, and I'd always been in the country. And I was pollinating blueberries. And to me, oh yeah, that was an idyllic situation. And in the old days, pollinating blueberries, like 15 years ago, your bees would grow on the blueberries and you'd make your splits and then you'd go on to the next crop and it was like perfect. And they had something to eat in the month of May. But things were really changing in the city, in the country, I mean, and I was finding that when I was finished the blueberry pollination, they hadn't grown the way they had before. I wasn't making splits and I'd get them into the next yard. And I would notice that the larvae were kind of dissolving. And what is this? Is it AFB? Is it EFB? I really had no idea. I just realized finally, after a number of years of my bees going into a slump after the blueberries, that, oh man, maybe it's not my beekeeping. Maybe there's something bigger going on here. And that's when I went to Marta Guarna and Heather Higo, who were, well, Marta is a researcher working with the government, and Heather is now the president of the BCHPA. But I went to them as scientists because I am basically the plodding beekeeper. Mind you, I don't give up. But I went in a crisis mode and said, can you help me? Is there any way we could do any kind of research to figure out what's going on in the blueberries? And so they took that on board and we did a preliminary study, and that has led me to be able to supply other bees in other studies, with the results haven't finally come out yet, but we're on the path. So the idea was, what could we do to keep bees healthy in the blueberries? Because they do get sick. So country life for me was shifting. You know, wow, those bees are sick coming out of the blueberries. You know, fungicide fogs, pesticide puddles, monoculture in the area where I'm living. It turned from all sorts of different crops to blueberries, and then cranberries. So dearths, we were experiencing dearths where I never had a dearth before. Temperatures were getting hotter. Losing habitat in the country, big tracts of land being developed. I mean, hundreds of acres just leaving. You would have a great yard, and the next thing you know, it was being developed. And I started to feel kind of dangerous. I felt like Bambi running around with my bees. Where can I be safe? You know, sprays all the time, week after week, another spray close by. I am involved in a study where my bees are bees that I look after are staying still, and we're monitoring levels of neonicotinoids in a number of sites. So at the same time that my bees were not doing well in the country, Sarah had asked me to bring some bees down into the city. They were doing well in the city and people were loving them. And we saw, this is when we started Hives for Humanity. We started to build up the bees in the city. The narrative about honeybees as you walked around the street was, oh man, they're dying. Are they really dying? How are the bees? And people were completely fascinated. Once you told them at a party or something, or a cup of coffee, that you're a beekeeper, and just questions, endless questions. People realize we need the bees, you know, post Kellogg's, all those cereals were putting honeybees on their packages. Save the honeybees, we have to save the honeybees. 1 in 3 bites, this was the mantra. And if we have bees, we'll have more flowers, you know, bring the bees. We need more bees in the city. It was very exciting. Once people got over the initial fears of being swarmed to death, to being stung. And so then for the hobbyists, we had more and more hobbyists taking courses. I mean, I teach courses as well. And every year there's just, I keep on wondering, for how many years are these courses going to fill? We have provincial apiculturists in Canada. And Paul Van Westendorp offers a course, and every year 1,000 people take that course. And sometimes he has to offer it twice. And it's not stopping over the past decade. So for the people who wanted to start keeping bees for any number of reasons, often they thought they wanted to keep bees because they wanted to save the bees. The city actually was a good place because, for instance, in a town or a city like Vancouver, we do have fewer chemicals. We're not allowed to be selling, using neonicotinoids in the gardens. We have ample trees and flowers. We have these wonderful tree-lined streets. No dearth because people are watering their plants. No dearth because the city waters the trees and waters planters on the streets. So it was a lot of honey and it was delicious. Kind of an easier life for the bees because the bees stay still and the food keeps coming. People were happy in their gardens because they felt pollination was happening and they were getting better yields. And it was like hip. It was hip to be a beekeeper. So we went to the idea of like cities are safe havens and bring the bees. Like let's have backyard bees, Detroit. Let's put bees in prisons because it can give the prisoners a job, something to do when they come out, prison bees. Hives for Humanity was therapeutic bees or bees for social change. And so it was sort of like societies and small operators having bees in the city, placing bees in gardens, placing bees in backyards. New York, kids could be involved. It was for the family, great activity for the family. And then in the last couple of years, it seems this has been the kind of shift, towards sort of, are we going sort of corporate? Is this another way? And Dewey also mentioned this. So, everything often it starts at the grassroots, and it's small, small's not efficient, bigger is better. Bigger always seems to be better. We always seem to go to that bigger is better thing. We always go to efficiencies. Urban beekeeping is not efficient. And when you have bees in backyards, traveling around to those bees, it's not efficient, but it's wonderful for different reasons. And of course, honey, everybody loves honey, and the great opportunities, PR opportunities. Once you're going the corporate way, you can have photo sessions with honeys, everyone's happy. So this is a little map of Canada. Here's where I am, Vancouver. And we go right over to the East Coast, and we have Newfoundland. Newfoundland, they have a wonderful trail there in Adelaide where you can walk a nature trail and you can see native pollinators, and they stop off at bee yards as well. But there are bees in the cities, the major cities, Montreal, Toronto, and they come over to Calgary and Vancouver. So if we just sort of take those, so we have followed the same trend that Dewey's talking about. And most of these cities in the provinces of Canada, there are small operations who have little companies handling bees, and also individuals, lots of hobby beekeepers. And sorry for the visual, but I don't know how to make a chart on the computer. So if you look at our bigger cities, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, it was quite interesting for me to see, oh, right, alveole, they have gone across Canada, and in quite large numbers, 543. I got this information on their webpage. Montreal, 512, Vancouver, 252, and Calgary, 199. Now, it's kind of difficult to get numbers from people. We have provincial apiculturists in charge of each of the provinces, but I didn't quite get to all of them. But the only one I felt confident talking about numbers was Vancouver, because I live here. And because I got a hold of Sarah, and I said, Sarah, can you tell me, what's your ideal now number of colonies? Because when we started Hives for Humanity, we started with 75 in the country and 75 in the city. And she said, well, we want to have somewhere between 20 and 30 colonies in the city, no more. And then I spoke to another East Van Bees, Steve. He again, so Hives for Humanity is a society running bees in the city. And this is Steve. He has a company, and he said he likes to run between 35 and 50 colonies max, but he says really 50, he finds it too much. And that's because it's so inefficient when you're just going to 1 or 2 colonies per site. So here, I'll talk about it later, but in Canada, we have restrictions as to how many colonies you can have on a property, depending on the size of the lot and what you're doing with those bees. So those numbers of 252 from alveole compared to these smaller numbers here, it's just quite interesting to see that. And in general, just like the States, just like everywhere in the world, the trend has been going up, up, up with urban beekeeping, and mostly doubling. So as we had this increase of bees in the city, and it's been sustained for like 10 years, and it started before, I'm sure. Now we sort of get this shift happening and lots of questions. And so when you hear honeybee, it's no longer, oh, the honeybees are in danger, what can we do? They're an introduced species, aren't they? And wild bees are dying too. I think we need to save the wild pollinators, because aren't in fact the honeybees competing, and aren't they over competing because they're this super organism? And I think our cities are capacity. I think honeybees are a nuisance. Let's get rid of the bees. So this pendulum swings. So as this pendulum has been swinging, and people have been talking more about the wild bees, now the companies and the societies also talk about the pollinators. So that's sort of like, I know that at Hives Humanity, we actually did start, when we did our bees, we wanted to introduce, we wanted to enhance gardens, make more food for the bees and the wild bees. So that was sort of all the way along. But you see the other companies as well, everybody starts to then make the topic bigger. So it's your honeybees and also the native bees or the wild bees. This is up in Toronto at the Fairmont Hotel there, where Wild for Bees. So they've got information about wild bees and the honeybees that they have on the roof. And so we've sort of done this, then it starts to shift. So now we're talking of pollinator trails. And, you know, the native bee societies are becoming more to the fore. They are more inclusive because you don't have to become a beekeeper now to save the bees. You just need to plant flowers, get your cities to change how they operate parks, less mowing, less pesticides, etc. And also pushing a pollinator stewardship, that whole idea that we can be looking at cities in a different way from what we've done in the past. This is an example of the Fairmont waterfront, because Dewey had mentioned the Fairmont chain. This particular hotel, they had put honeybees in 2008 up on the third floor, downtown Vancouver. And then in 2011, when we were there, we built this pollinator hotel. And while it's really a talking point to give people an idea of what they can do in their own gardens to encourage bees to have a place to live, and then plant things for them to have forage. So wild bees. So the signage at the waterfront is one half of their garden is pollinator with the wild bees, and then the other part is the honeybees. That's one of the things Melanie talked about before was the difference between COVID. COVID has put the brakes to quite a few, I think, situations where there have been bees on rooftops and bees in the public domain because we have not been able to go look after them due to COVID restrictions. So it's an interesting time now to have a shift, because a number of these places haven't been running bees for a year or two now. So this is a great time if you're going to make a shift to make the shift. So it's fascinating, I find, to figure out how are we going to find the balance now? You know, should there be density regulations? Should we be identifying the wild bee areas? Should we be making maps so that we look at the city in a different way? And as Dewey says, get down on the ground, not enough to say it's a green space. You have to find out what's there when it's available as food. So then we create hive locator maps. You know, how do you monitor the floral resources? How do you measure capacity? How do you find and maintain the balance? So as I say, I'm not a scientist, and you know, I see the problem. I just don't know quite how to address the problem. Even what Dewey just said, it depends on what stage of the growth cycle you are in the colony as to what it takes to sustain the colony. I hadn't thought of it from that angle, Dewey. It's polarizing. These days, if you have a disagreement with somebody over something, it seems to get very polarized. So I think we have to pay attention as beekeepers. This is going on. There is this kind of tension, pressure, under pressure. We're all under that pressure. So this is my nephew. He did this for me, you know, in her bliss here. She's got bees here, her little wild bees who are happy. She's got her beehives. They've done so well that they've swarmed over here. Very, very happy with her flowers. And this person right next door has no interest in nature. So you have to remember that. We love our bees. Not everybody loves our bees. So as an urban beekeeper then, I think it's really, really important that we have our #1 game on the go, because we're always in the public eye. We're moving our bees in and out of the city or in and out of apiary sites. That discussion about surviving the winter. You know, some sites in the city, you need to take them away for the winter. They don't do well if you leave them there. If you take them back somewhere else to a better site and then put them there. So it's just an urban site for the growing season for the bees, not for the winter. So you're moving your bees. You need to inspect your bees regularly, 7 to 10 days, I would suggest, because you cannot afford to make a mistake. And if you're inspecting once a week and you've made a mistake, you've missed a swarm cell, you'll catch it on the second time. Beekeepers in the city, you know, you're constantly entertaining people. They're asking you questions when you're beekeeping. You're educating all the time when you're beekeeping, and you are an ambassador for the bees. So you have to be nice with people. And if you're going to have a swarm, you're going to be catching that swarm with an audience, and that audience can be 5 people, it can be 30 people. It's amazing what happens when you're in the city at a light, and you know, you're under a light and there's a cluster there and you've got cars going by and buses and people. It can get very, very busy. So as a beekeeper, you really have to understand your bees and react when things go sideways so that you can stop it before you get into a kind of crisis. Because you know, we've had all this very positive PR on the honeybees to date. And we all know that it takes a long time to build a good reputation. And then it just takes one or two little things to go wrong and you lose that reputation. The fall from grace is rapid. So responsible beekeeping, respectful beekeeping. If you just think in terms of the mites and diseases and forage, you have to remember, right, the bees live in our garden and they come back and forth from their home in our garden, but in the interim, they're all over the place. So you have to remember then your bees are interacting with other bees, that as a beekeeper, the decisions you make are going to have ramifications on a fellow beekeeper. You may not know that beekeeper. You may not know that there's a beekeeper across the fence 2 houses down, but there is somebody there. So what you do will have an impact on that person. And then I think we do have to take into consideration when we're putting in our yards, what are the forage resources here? What else is growing here? What else needs to live here? What's the competition going to be? And also, in the same vein, is there going to be enough food here to sustain this colony, my colony, so it doesn't become stressed? Again, the neighbors, you have to be cognizant of the fact that not everybody loves the bees. And just there was a fellow here talking about that. Some people are terrified of bees. Many people don't know a bee from a wasp. They've been stung or harassed by wasps and they say it's honeybees. So they've got these deep-seated fears and you need to educate them and get them over those fears. And again, in order to do any of that, you need to understand how your bees think. What do they do? Why do they do things? Because they are this big super organism, 50,000 bees at the peak. And they are communicating all the time so that they can cooperate with one another. So whatever they do really escalates quickly. So if we just look at 4 things, water source, if they don't have a water source, they become a nuisance. Swarming, reproduction, swarming is an incident in the city. If they're not getting food sources, this can lead to robbing, or if they're weak, sick hives, they can be taken out through robbing. And of course, there's defense, stinging. So all the bees need water. They need water all year round for any number of reasons. And there are lots of ways you can supply water to the bees in your backyard. And the one I want to point out to you, this is just a Frisbee, this is a rock in a pan. This one here, try and remember this one. This is at the waterfront. So this is a little hole here in the stone and this drip, drip, drip from this pipe. And this is right in the yard. And although the bees are about 30 feet from a swimming pool, they don't go to the swimming pool because these 4 colonies had this constant source of water there. So you need to make sure when you're putting your bees in the city that you've put the water source before you put the bees. You can bait it with salt water to make it more attractive to the bees. I don't know, Dewey, maybe you'll tell me if bees can smell clean water, because I don't know if they can. But I always have my bees love to go to dirty, icky water before they go to clean water. And it's one of the things in the Oregon thing that says put clean water. So my experience is that they like the non-clean water. So there's the water at the Fairmont waterfront. So as we look at climate change, which it is changing, we need to really connect the dots so that we can keep our bees safe. So yeah, no water, no nectar. So like last summer, we had unbelievable heat here. All the plants were there, but there was no nectar in those plants because they hadn't had rain. So no nectar means stress for the bees, because the bees go to the flowers and they work the flowers very quickly and they're not getting a reward. And then the scouts start to scout around quite desperately. This can lead to robbing. This can lead to harassing people with sweet drinks and things like that. And bees are very, very determined. And once they find something, they will come back and linger there. If you've left a mess somewhere, they'll clean up that mess for you of sticky honey and they'll come back and they'll hover and wait till you come back and they'll be right on you again. So again, you have to be able, we had one case of vandalism in that garden in the first year that somebody took a frame of honey out of the colony and they threw it in the bushes. And when I got there, because one of the guys in the street called us, I saw the honey there. So the bees were all around that one comb. So, right, you find out where are the bees. So you watch where they are, figure out what they're going to, clean it up, 20 minutes, and it's all calm. So my close call that really was going to be a disaster was at the Waterfront Hotel. And it was, so I've got a couple of stories here. I've made all sorts of mistakes. I've never had a crisis in the city, but I've come awfully close. So I was outside going to do a demonstration, and it was during this heat phase of in August. It was just really, really hot, and not a time you want to be going into the bees. But I was going into the bees, doing a demo for PR. I was wondering, was I looking attractive? Did I have everything set up? How is this going to go? It all got delayed. And as I was there, the bees were coming and they were landing on my bee brush, and they wouldn't go away. And I was sort of irritated, but didn't pay attention to them because I was paying attention to myself. And it was really, really hot. We'd had this intense heat. We're into like day 10 of it. And I looked over to the swimming pool, and it was like so many people in the pool, and every chair was filled with somebody having a sticky drink, cool lemonade, Coca-Cola. They were leaving their drinks on the table because there weren't enough waiters to look after that. So I was thinking, man, everything's at capacity. This doesn't feel good. And the bees were working the lavender so quickly, and they were just, it didn't feel right to me. So then I realized I went through this demonstration, got it over with. It was like 6 o'clock at night then. And then I started to figure out, okay, what's wrong here? I could see bees chasing people around. So the irrigation had failed in the pollinator garden. So the bees were working the plants, and the plants weren't giving them any nectar. I went over to where the bees had their pump that I showed you. A bird had knocked the pump over, and it wasn't pumping out the water. They had lost their water source. Again, they had all these sweet drinks around, and the pool was there. And when I went up to the roof later on, I found out that another company had placed bees on a rooftop right across the street. And those bees were just on the asphalt with no water, no nothing. So I was thinking, oh, terrific. So this could have been horrendous. But fortunately, it was the evening. So I got that pump by their bees fixed immediately. I had syrup made, and I fed them all. And then I came back first thing in the morning, and I knew I had one cranky hive there anyway, and I simply took it out. And then the irrigation was mended the next day. So because I just couldn't take the risk of anything going bad, I just threw the book at the problem, and the problem was instantly solved before there were people at the pool the next day. But it can go from being completely a blissful situation to you feeling very responsible for the health and safety of many people because you've got bees, and possibly too many bees on a site in the city. So that's the importance of water and training your bees to water. Swarms. So in general, I mean, there are many ways to do your swarm management, but what I would just like to say is that you want to stay ahead of the growth of the bees so they don't have that tendency to swarm, which they are bred to do, because when they swarm, it's this dark moving cloud of insects, which is completely horrifying for people. It's exciting for some people and very scary for others. Then there's the spectacle of the cluster. And in the city, the cluster can be hanging in all sorts of areas where it's completely not safe in case they fall down or there's too many people walking underneath them. So and people notice the bees because, as you know, as they start to settle, there's quite a bit of activity in the air, and then it all goes quiet. And then if you don't catch that swarm, the swarm is going to move off, and it's going to go to a cavity or to a hedge or somewhere in the city or in the inner city there, where it's going to cause another problem. And this time you may not be able to solve that problem because you will not know where they have gone. So big nuisance, big time nuisance. So this is where you really don't want a swarm, and this is why you don't want a swarm. These are all in my opinion. So you definitely need to know how to calmly retrieve a swarm. There's an easy one. And are you still calm? So I was called out to one at downtown, and I got up on one of these forklifts and scissor lifts had to go up. And the problem with that, getting a swarm in the city is normally you would leave your box there for the bees to come down to, and you'd come back at night and you would take them away when you would get all the scout bees. But often when you're in the city, you get one chance on that scissor lift. You need to take the swarm when you get it, and you need to respond quickly because people are upset. So often in the city, there's a compromise. You do something for the humans that you know is not particularly perfect for the bees. So best not to find yourself in those situations. So in Canada, we have an Animal Health Act, which sort of looks after, from the point of view of spreading disease and containing disease. So it's sort of focuses about the transportation of bees. We have municipal bylaws. So each one of our municipalities has a set of rules telling us where we can put our bees, where they should be in a back garden, how many we can have. And we have, we're supposed to register our bees here. And the great thing about registering our bees here is that we are then become able to have free services in British Columbia through the Department of Agriculture. And you can call the provincial apiculturist for help. We have inspectors that can come help you and inspect your bees for free. And we also now in British Columbia and across Canada, we have tech transfer people. So this is all very exciting to think that there's going to be more help. And I'm hoping personally that the tech transfer can become involved in urban beekeeping and supporting the urban beekeepers. So you've read your municipality bylaws, you know you can have bees, you got the green light. So you make sure you read that document from Oregon because it's brilliant. But you want to plan your apiary carefully and the placement carefully. You want to do that risk assessment. I love doing a risk assessment for the bees. You know, what risks are they at, and for the humans. And I also carry honey and suggest that honey is a great way to ask for forgiveness. It's a great way to pave the way to have bees somewhere. And also when I ever have problems with neighbors or something who are frightening my bees, I say, look, I can pick up those bees the next day. If there's a crisis or you get really nervous, you never get used to them, I'll move them. So it's good when you're having bees in the city to have a plan. What if I have to move them? Have a friend or whatever. And when you do your planning, beekeeping in the city is like magic. And when you don't, it's the complete gong show. So do your planning. Make sure when you're traveling with your bees that you've got them strapped down, so that if you come to any kind of sudden stop, your bees aren't sliding all over the place and causing a commotion. Hive lifters are a terrific way to walk around in gardens and small passages instead of holding it with just by the stand. And these nets that you can get to go around an individual colony, because most people in the city are just dealing with 1 or 2 colonies in a yard here, or 1 or 2 on a rooftop. It's a great sort of layer of insurance, that because you know that if something happens and the bees get out, as they often do, they're not going any further than that net. And this is in the Fairmont. If you don't have a net, if you can just wrap your bees up so that you know they can't get out. So, we would pull the truck up, we would put them, surround them with a tarp. So if a bee crawls out, they can't get anywhere. And then you can feel secure moving through hallways. And, if you're in condos, all sorts of places you can end up putting bees in the city. And you often have to go through corridors with people and elevators. And then if you do get flyers, here's where you need to know your bee biology. So, they're going to go to the light. So you wait and you let them go to the light. And then we often had a little vacuum that we could suck the bees and not kill them. So you can either vacuum them, or 1 or 2, sadly, you need to pinch and kill that bee. You don't want to leave that bee up in the light in the elevator and you leave. And you can also make sure that you're moving your bees at a time that's good for both humans and the bees. So early in the morning, late at night. You always want to keep your bees cool during transportation, because sometimes in the city you can get stuck in traffic, things go wrong. So you want to make sure that the bees can breathe and that they stay cool. Little things like rubber tires filled with air are much better than plastic tires when they're on a trolley, because when you're going over the cracks and things and sidewalks, it's very jarring for the bees. But a nice air-filled tire is very, very sweet. And remember, if you had to kill bees, or if they're dead bees, to pick them up and clean them up, because the dead bee can sting. And it's because people have in their minds that they're going to get swarmed to death. It's not what happens. We know that. It's the beekeeper who can get stung, but this is not a sight we see here. And it's deep-seated. This is Cupid running to his mother. He's been robbing the hives, but this image is in people's heads. So if you've got problems in the city, such as wasps and skunks and raccoons, they can make your bees defensive and edgy. So there are things you can do. They talk about it in the pamphlet, such as chicken wire. Most people don't know the difference between a wasp and a honeybee, and that's one of the great things you can do as an urban beekeeper, educate. So again, depending on how tense the situation is and how quickly you have to respond, you can simply, if you've got a colony, if you've got somebody complaining that they're being chased around the garden, switch out your colony, just take it away. Or you can switch up the demographic in your colony. You can take out the older bees, take out the foragers with your queen, just take it out in a nuke box quickly right away, leaving the colony still there and requeen. But the key thing is to try and stay calm. Try to really understand what the issue is so that you actually solve the problem. And if you don't have the luxury of time, just take the bees away. And I'm always ready to feed. I find just like children, feed the bees and everybody calms down. So I'd like to this concept of the growth of the colony and the time in the city. In any time, but in the city, these becomes more critical when it's easy to work your bees, when your bees are in a good mood, and when your bees are tense or when your bees are more defensive. So this first part here in Vancouver, this first part of the growth curve, you can get away with almost anything with bees. Yeah, I don't need smoke. Oh, I can just put a queen in there, no problem. We can have great long inspections, because the bees are just in a great mood. I mean, everything's happening for them. The days are getting longer. There's more food. There's plenty to eat. It's beautiful. But get them into August, September. Now you have challenging beekeeping. Now you have, if you're a messy beekeeper and you're leaving sticky stuff out or a hive tool that's got honey on it, the bees will jump on it and your bees are going to start to be jumpy. And you don't want that in urban settings. Yeah. Just a really calm colony. And this is how you want your bees to be. And when you've got people looking at the bees with you, and when you're showing a group of people how wonderful the bees are, you actually want them to look like that. You don't want them to jump up and go at your face. So again, pay attention to your bees. The other day I was with somebody and we opened up the colony, they all jumped and, oh man, this is terrible, but we got to push through. I said, well, do we have to push through? Where's the sun coming? So we went to the other side of the yard, started where there was sun, and the bees were completely fine. And by the time we came to this aggressive colony, they were in the sun and they were fine. So again, listen to your bees and understand what they need as well in an inspection. Urban inspecting. So just remember that if you're inspecting and people are asking you questions, it goes very, very slowly. And you have to keep in mind, how long has this colony been open? How long have I been disturbing the bees? So I used to try and inspect and demonstrate, and then this is ridiculous. So now when I have people coming to the yard, I just demonstrate, just take out and show them a couple of frames, let them see what's happening, because I can't keep track of what's going on in the colony and the people. And people are really unpredictable. They're very unpredictable. So when you're beekeeping in the city, no matter where you are, like this is in a housing development in downtown Vancouver, you want to always have your smoker going. So many people, especially new beekeepers, pride themselves on not having a smoker. A smoker is a really good tool to keep your bees calm in it before something happens. And also if you need to steer them away, it's beautiful. And people love the smell of the smoke. So the smoker calms the people down who are in your bee yard. You want to have the right equipment. So for instance, these people are harvesting, they've got an escape board. So instead of having bees flying around and being brushed or blown dry or something like that, they just take the box away. There's no kerfuffle, the bees are fine. And here they are because gardeners are going to come in right after those beekeepers have been there. So be efficient in your work, minimal disturbance to your bees, which means you have to be organized and think about, what am I going to do? What's the order? Where am I putting things? Extra covers in case you need to cover boxes while you've got them taken apart. And sugar or water mister or spray bottle is a great way, if you've got bees jumping up and starting to fly, to immobilize the bees. It's also a wonderful way to spray the bees with sugar water. They get completely, oh, sugar water, and they start grooming one another. So again, there are lovely ways you can keep the bees calm that are not harmful to the bees and make the experience for everybody very enjoyable. There's nothing worse than having a bunch of people getting stung by your bees. So when you start to beekeep in the city, this is Dumbo me here in my first year, I would do anything, go anywhere to get bees in the city. So there I am up on that container, no room for me to move, no room for me to ask for anybody to help. I went up this ridiculous ladder. And what happened was I started skipping inspections because I just didn't want to do that. And so if you're not in a safe place, if you're not in a yard that's accessible, easily accessible, it becomes this huge mountain that you're not willing to climb, and you're not a good beekeeper. And you can also have an accident. This was a yard that was on top of the building that was brilliant for the bees. They did very well, but it was useless because people couldn't interact with the bees. So it was put there on that roof for safety, to keep them bees out of trouble with the people. But what we wanted them to do was connect with the bees, and that wasn't happening. So we took that down, and they made a bee yard right out. This was a community center, right out in the front of the community center, and put up these extra for bee flight, bee path. And there was trees there, and the bees just whirled up there and off they went. And so there those bees are, right in the middle of right by the entrance to this community center, and no problem. And it's been great having workshops there. So it's funny how it goes. And this one is like, this is my idea of a nightmare yard up on a roof with that. Here is that, I swear, that's got to be a ladder on a wall. I've been up those. That to get up there is hard enough with empty equipment, and then to beekeep up there, the wind, and with the climate change coming along, it's hot. I have a friend in Toronto who's been beekeeping on roofs, and he says he's taking his bees off the roofs because last summer his feet were hot, and he said it's starting to be unbearably hot up there. With the wind, is a hot wind, and the roof is burning my feet. What's it doing to the bees? It's stressing the bees. Signs are really good, and it's interesting when you're in the city. It's what atmosphere do you want to create? You know, please respect the bees. So it's not a bunch of rules. It's like, can you respect the bees, and here's why. So people really do well with that, and there should be somebody who can be contacted no matter when to deal with problems if there's a problem. And again, neighbors, you want to get along with the kids for sure, and honey is a great way to do that. And stopping and having a chat with them and getting them on your side, very important. So maybe you're right and within the law to have the bees, but it's also no fun if people hate you because you have bees. It takes all the joy, or much of the joy, out of it. So when you're in the city, what's happening in your truck? Where are you storing your equipment? Is it bee tight? Is your smoker out? Do you have water on board in case you have a problem? Do you have tarps? And, you know, making mistakes. If you think of that growth cycle, if you make a mistake in the first part of the growth cycle, you can get away with it. You make a mistake in the second part of the summer when the bees are really scouting for an easy meal. Now you can have just a horrible field incident around your truck or where you're storing your equipment. And the truck, you know, you're not with your truck. So that can be, you come back to your truck and it's a cloud of bees and people getting very upset about your bees who've been parked on a street. So this is Phil. He likes to put his smoker, he likes to go on his bicycle. And this is a metal container and the smoker's there. He never has fires. I have had 3 or 4 fires in my truck. So and I'm very good about that now. I don't make that mistake. And the other thing is, if you haven't taken good care of strapping your equipment and keeping it bee tight, you can be in the city in your truck, stopped at red light, you get this cloud over you, you take off and the bees are left behind. And now they're in the face of motorcyclists and cars and bikes. It's just not a good scene. So you have to be neat and tidy, hygienic. And remember, 20-minute, I call it the 20-minute rule. Anybody can disagree with me, but I think it takes 20 minutes for your bees to jazz up into being uncontrollable. And it takes, once you solve the problem, which you've usually caused, it takes 20 minutes to calm down. And this is just an illustration of this is about 10 or 12 years ago. This is my son did this because he thought it was so funny. I had been harvesting honey in the backyard. And my friend was over and we were going to have a party for her children, her grandchildren. And she suggested I have a gin and tonic because I'd been working so hard. And I said, well, I'm not finished the harvest, but okay. So I had a gin and tonic. I left a little tiny bit of the Tupperware where I had put some frames in open, and I fell asleep. And my dream was jet planes going over my head. And when I woke up, oh yeah, it wasn't jet planes, it was the bees. And the bees had found the little tiny crack and they were robbing. And I had also been to the kitchen and I had put my hands on a doorknob and there were bees everywhere. And the kids were coming in about half an hour. And so my Donna said, I need to cancel. I can't have my grandchildren. I said, no, we've got 35 minutes. In 20 minutes, this is going to be calm. So this is where, if you understand your bees and you have faith in yourself, once you solve the problem, the bees will just be 20 minutes behind you. And that's exactly what happened there. It was just chaotic with bees everywhere. I hosed everything down, got everything under control, closed up the bees, and the party happened. No problem. 20 minutes. So workshops, where to stand in a workshop. So when you do workshops, as many new beekeepers do in the city, because people want to see their bees, or if you have a party and they all want to look, you need to watch where the bees are flying. I think everyone needs to be wearing a veil. And you then have to have one person watching the bees and one person watching the people. So in this case, this was Mark Winston, very well-known scientist, biologist, beekeeper. I was gobsmacked to have him there. It was hot. We'd put a tarp over the apiary and we had a big colony open. Didn't pay attention. I wasn't paying attention. And this was the very beginning. And halfway through, I saw all the bees. Oh, they're going to be all in people's hair. And I stopped the workshop. I said, I'm so sorry. Could we just stop? Because the bees, they had flown out. And when they came back, there was people in front of their colonies. There was a tarp over them. Nothing looked the same. So the bees weren't attacking, but the bees were very, very confused. So what we did was simply move over 25 feet. We put frames in a nuke box. We carried on, not a problem. So from then on, when I would do workshops, I would use a nuke. I would always do it away. This is the same area. This over here would be where further on down was where the bees were, but now got them over here. And I find getting people to sit down is brilliant because I can control the people much better if they are stationary. So here, everybody's got a veil, so I don't have to worry about a mistake. I know I've got young bees who are not flyers on that. So I'm very relaxed and it makes for a much better workshop, I think. So in a workshop, instead of maybe going into your big colony, especially if you're a new beekeeper, prepare a nuke, make your nuke what you need to show the people. And you can put the queen, young bees, etc. And then move the nuke and the people away from the yard and everything is calm. And if any bees come out, they fly home. So here's another example. That's Paul Van Westendorp, our provincial apiculturist, who kind of used to come and give the workshop. You've got people in chairs away from the bees. It's perfect. And then when he wants to bring a frame over, he brings it over to the people. So for workshops then, if you go back to this, it's very easy and safe to have a workshop at the first part of the growth cycle. So nuke demonstrations, open apiary visits, full inspections, no problem. Honey tastings outside, no problem. You're pretty relaxed because the bees are relaxed. Over here, where we live in Vancouver, times are getting a little tough for the bees now in the end of July, August. So we have observation hives, or I do when I do a personal one, observation hive now. Instead of bringing the bees out, let them look at photos. Any honey tastings go on indoors and strict hygiene. So that way it can just stay calm. So the takeaway is relaxed bees, edgy bees, and you need to behave accordingly. So in the end, the conclusion, that's just some tips. I hope they're of value. I hope I haven't wasted your time, but becoming a beekeeper, it's not going to save the bees, but it might save you. It might save the beekeeper because they really bring joy. And I think beekeeping in the city is totally worth it. And it builds community. And I've seen it over and over. It just builds community with people who have nothing on the streets. And also for the people who have, it also builds community in those neighborhoods. And urban beekeeping will not solve the deficit of pollinating bees for our crops. And we do have a deficit of bees for the crops, but it has brought, I think, the plight of all pollinators to mind. And so I think still ahead of us, we've got challenges for urban beekeeping and plenty of opportunities if we handle it properly. And I just wanted to end with 2 slides. That's the Ukraine, a child in Ukraine has made that drawing, and well, you'll know why I've put that there. And the final thing, the epiphany that I had in the city is that the bees and the people suffer and benefit from the same things. And so over drugs, too many antibiotics, toxins, poor nutrition, leading to poor gut health, lack of community, fighting, war, not good for either of them. They need protection. Humans need protection too. And we all need a home. We all perhaps need a little more rest in our lives. We need to take care of each other, respect each other, and collaborate rather than compete. That's a little bit preachy maybe, but that's what hit me in 2012 when I was downtown with those bees. I'm done. That's it. So.
Thank you, Julia. That was really, both these presentations have just been chock full of so many really good tidbits. And thank you for being so thorough. I mean, I feel like, especially with all the details that there are to beekeeping, right? And when we think of urban beekeeping or beekeeping in the city or within a community sort of limit or region, there's so many details that we don't think about. You know, we just tend to think, oh, bees, and I saw some bees on my flowers, I'm going to get bees, you know, and it's like, well, if you saw bees on your flowers, there's already bees nearby, right? So many little things like that crop up. And I wanted to touch upon a couple of things just because I thought you really referenced them very eloquently. You know, you talked about briefly about how folks tend to think how, you know, honeybees can be considered invasives or exotics even. And to a certain extent, that's partially true, but it's not the complete story. I mean, the truth is that North America did have its very own honeybee species, Apis mellifera nearctica, and there's fossil evidence of them found in Nevada that dates 14 million years old. And so I personally consider our modern day honeybees to be sort of reintroduced cousins to this ancestor bee. So they were here before, and they did coexist with other bee species as well. And a sort of climatic event, cataclysmic event happened, and just like with horses, there was an ice age, and that kind of, they were here, but then they weren't, and then they were brought back. And so I really see honeybees as something that, in terms of them being for humanity, right? There's been a long-standing relationship and stewardship, and many of our ancestors, whether from this continent or from more recent introductions, we all have ancestors that have familiarity with bee stewardship and with beekeeping. And that's what's I think such a beautiful story to really share, is just our relationship as humans to bees. What's our reason behind wanting to interact with them, wanting to keep them or nurture them? And it really is a reconnection to nature, and especially for those living in the quote unquote concrete jungles. You know, one of the things that I remember from that presentation back in 2013 was the story of a homeless person who, as you mentioned, you know, in terms of vandalism, you know, that you don't see that much because people in the community become really invested in the well-being and care of these hives, is this gentleman saying, you know, he had a reason to look up now to see the bees flying. And I just thought that was so beautiful, because it's so true. I mean, they give us a pause and a reflection, you know, as they say, stop and smell the roses, or, you know, stop and look at the bees, right? And the fact that these honeybees, which to a certain extent are, you know, exploited poster children, they invite us into this broader world of pollinator stewardship and environmental interaction and connection with, as you mentioned, you know, the 2 balconies. I love that drawing, with one that's full and teeming with bees and plants, and then the other one that's very austere and rather bare, you know, so to speak, in terms of that. But the fact that not everybody does, you know, but for those of us that do, and those of us that feel that infectious vibe in which we want to share our enthusiasm for bee stewardship, that's fantastic. So there have been a few questions, and some are for both of you, and some are individual here. And thank you, Dewey, for answering some of these questions. Julia, same thing. You've got a lot of wonderful compliments. Sherry Olson, who's our treasurer.
Very bad at doing two things. Okay.
No, I'm gonna look up. I'm gonna read them to you. And Sherry Olson, our treasurer, gives you a really nice compliment in the chat, thanking you for your presentation and great info. Same from Heil Glenn, Butler Greg, thanking both of you, and Scott Steinfeld, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, Carrie Yost, Jock Rawls, this is great. There's a lot of positive, and Nuria Morphin as well. We have a question here for Dewey, I think initially here. What's the story with the new USDA office? So curious about how you calculate carrying capacity for city bee yards, and addressing the question of completion, but I think they're meaning competition with native bees.
So each of those are talking themselves. The new USDA is mandated by the 2018 Farm Bill. They're just getting underway. They do have a granting program. Their first round of grants did not include anything on honeybees. Their emphasis has been on growing plants in the urban environment more than anything else, sustainable agriculture. But bees should be included. They're just getting started. And as I indicated, their outreach would actually be through the various county USDA agencies, but those are mostly for some aspect of animal husbandry or production agriculture. They seldom consider aspects of small scale, which might by definition include urban beekeeping. Carrying capacity, we have quite an ecology on carrying capacity, and we've worked it for a number of different insects. The issue with foraging insects is they can range further if the forage is poor. So it's not a set distance, which complicates application of a formula. In addition, which carrying capacity? Most beekeepers are thinking of honey production. So how many colonies can I put in this yard and still get honey production from all of the colonies? Whereas carrying capacity is going to be very different for spring and or fall. So the concept of carrying capacity has been well worked out, but really not for aspects of foraging. Right. The studies on competition with other organisms, other bees, is pretty complicated. There are probably 100 different studies on competition between honeybees and native insects, pollinators, or native other bees. About 3/4 of them indicate no negative effect of honeybees. However, when you get in environments that are not as rich for foraging bees and pollinators, then some of the studies do indicate that by bringing honeybees into an environment, you can then affect the availability of the resources for the native pollinators, the other bees that are in that particular environment. And so the studies are mixed. There's no one answer to any of the how many can be a carrying capacity, or the other aspect in terms of how many may fit within an area in one particular area.
You know,
thank you, Dewey. And that's going to have me hit Julia with the hardest question of all, is or hardest questions. In regards to that same topic, what are you finding to be, at least in your experience and in your area, this concept of carrying capacity, but also how does that relate to other pollinator species that may be in those urban environments?
Well, so talking back to what Dewey was just talking about, I've been thinking in my head that we talk about this competition, and to me, it breaks down into 4 different areas for our area. And it's kind of, and around the fact that bees are, well, the way that we have it with monoculture, and the way that we've taken away hedgerows and things, and we haven't spent enough time looking at the wild bees, the pollinators, we need to increase that. But it's like this problem of when you've got the honeybees by pallet, like thousands of bees, and you've taken them out of a crop, they need to go somewhere to clean them up. and to stage them for the next thing. So, what are we supposed to do with this livestock? And I guess in the past, because we didn't seem to feel this pressure between, there was so much of everything. Anyway, so I didn't answer that question because I'm in the middle of that. But in the city, what I tell people to do and what we've done, and I know what Sarah has done with the Bees and Hives to Humanity, is they've kept a close watch on how the yards are doing. And some of the yards and some of the apiaries are no longer producing honey. And that's because, so then they start looking, okay, what's going on? And they're cleaning up the railroad tracks, they're cleaning up the foreshore at the harbors, development. So I think it really is up to the beekeeper to keep track of, okay, how is this apiary changing? Like Tom in Vancouver, in Toronto, his feet are hot. He knows it's too hot up there. So he's either got to insulate the bees from the bottom and the top, which is a great help, or move the bees. So I think you just have to keep, for the beekeeper, that gives you a sense of how the bees are doing, how much honey they're able to make, and what's the norm, what was the norm. But every summer is really different. We had a very, 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 very hot summer last summer. So you just have to keep a close eye. You have to monitor everything.
Yeah, and that's so true. Jay McComb mentioned that they'd be so curious to see some research about how many hives a city apiary could support. And the bottom line is that it depends on the city, right? It depends on the area of forage. It depends on the average sort of mean-fall rain and moisture, but also even heat. And this kind of ties in. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Julia.
I have to interrupt you because my brain will lose it. But with all beekeeping, you can be there and holy moly, all of a sudden, like 200 hives just got placed there, and you have no control over it. And then the same in the city. You've been there for years. What's different? Oh my God! Like there's 4 colonies over here and 2 colonies over here. So it's inexact science.
Well, and kind of to touch upon not only this theme, which maybe we can talk about at a later WAS conference, but also from some comments in the chat, we had Lisa Hayes share about how there's ordinances regarding beekeeping in the city limits and state regulations. And Daniel Schoenthal mentioned that people are encouraged to post local regulations on this Facebook site. So that's a great place to locate them. But also in terms of taking into consideration just what's happening year to year. And as we see shifting patterns within the weather, within environmental conditions, and even just how land is being used, especially with COVID, in certain places there were, which metropolises there still are, right? But a lot of businesses couldn't make it through and had to shut down. So now this is sort of a defunct area of space, right? Where it's not wild, but it's also not maintained. And so kind of touching back into, you had mentioned early on in your presentation, the Detroit Hives folks who, their whole premise within their city limits was reclaiming empty lots and creating pollinator habitat out of those surface areas to add to what was available for nutrition, which it does seem, if we ask, I want to ask you the same question that somebody else had asked previously, which is it worth it, Julia? Knowing the challenges and knowing the sort of, the forever questions and students that we are of this lifelong craft, what I like to call an artistic science or scientific art, right? What is it worth it? Is it worth it to try to do this in the city?
Well, Hives to Humanity, at the beginning, we had these bees all over the place. And I said, Sarah, this is so inefficient. But on the other hand, it's doing exactly what you want it to do. So we've got our values all wrong. I'm a terrible business person. And every time I put money as a reason to do something, I screw up. So
I often answer with just, is it economical to keep backyard chickens? I figure those eggs cost me about 20 bucks a dozen.
But the joy,
right?
joy of looking at, the joy of connecting with nature, and there's so many different ways to connect with nature and to connect with one another again. And I think we found out through COVID that this lack of human connection has also been hard on people. So there's a company out of Calgary that when they sell their nukes, they ask the people, do you mind if we share your postal code so that we can make a density map? And then it doesn't exactly give the exact location, but an area. And then if somebody wants to beekeep, but they can't have bees, can they connect with you? And she gets their permission to share connections, and then they can share the bees. So more than one person. And that's kind of good too, because people often think they can still go on their summer holiday when they have bees and things like that. So you get more people, perhaps. I don't know. It's trickier, but maybe worthwhile. My short answer is yes, it is worthwhile. We just need to find the balance now.
I would second that for sure.
Most definitely. And let me see here, because I know we have more comments. We have,
I also don't think it's, I've had several new beekeepers who want to run workshops, who want to start programs that are, I think, beyond their ability, because it takes us such a long time to understand these animals and to know all the tricks of the trade to keep things calm and to have the confidence to do that. And I find every year I learn more and more about how to work with my bees. I don't know, Dewey. It takes a long time, right? To learn to get their signals. And if you listen to the signals, you don't have a problem, but you need to pay attention to them. And it's so hard when you've got people around you and you've got your ego going to listen to
all
them.
of our beekeeping is to animal husbandry, and it is easier for people that have some experience with other animals or with farming, rural life, to be able to pick up the types of things that we're teaching about how keeping bees. That doesn't work as well for city residences because they don't come from that particular background. We need a new paradigm for teaching people in cities how to do it.
I always tell somebody it's like milking a cow. It's like working a horse. You got to get in nice and close. And then they say, I've never been around a horse or a cow. Like, oh, right. That's so true, Dewey. I got to think of something else. Anybody else can send us, email me, please, and give me another analogy. I'd be very happy.
I can add one thing here. Last class I was teaching for beginners, one person, she came from a cow farm. Just in the middle of the class, she sent me a message and she said, Medhat, I didn't expect that bees be that difficult to keep. It's harder more than keeping my cows. So I sent back, I said, honey, they are livestock. She wrote back and she said, you are damn right. So unfortunately, frankly, over the last 10, 15 years since the CCD came and we had big surge of urban beekeepers coming in business, now I am seeing the opposite trend now. Some people start to realize it is not for them. At the beginning, they were excited, but now they start selling their equipment and saying, you know what, it's too much expensive. I don't have much time. I cannot keep the bees alive. Which like the
big turning, a huge turning of that population. They're there at this meeting. They don't even go back to another meeting. Just a huge turning. They start with bees and maybe twice start with bees, but not going to do it the third time.
The first year they get excited, and when they call me the second year died, I said because the first year the bees were managed by the original owner. Second year, that's your management, so you still need to keep it for another year to get in the cycle to understand your bees. But that really.
But then the mice have got all the bees.
Yeah.
But I think also people, the way we teach beekeeping, like everybody knows that you have to have your hands in the bees to learn. You can get you can stuff them in the 16-hour courses. I hate them because I know that there's just no way. It's just like washing over, and the bees are going to educate them. So I think we need to change also how we teach people how to beekeep. You come out to the yard for a season, right? And you learn with the bees, and you learn with 10 bees, not one colony or 2 colonies. So, yeah.
I really always recommend getting hands and bees before the first beekeeping class, because then you have a frame of reference of what they're talking about.
Yeah.
A beginning class can go right over your head if you've never had gloves on.
That is so true. And all the more reason to have mentorship, you know, and to be able to participate in either community projects or bee clubs. You know, that's one of the first things I tell people too when dealing with, you know, to be honest, who are we to deny somebody the experience of becoming a beekeeper or attempting to become a beekeeper, right? We all had our start somewhere. And it's just interesting though, because on the one hand, there's that you want to be fair and everybody should try it, but we also recognize that, you know, we don't need everybody on top of each other, and there's only so much forage, and there's also additional constraints, right? And as Dr. Nasser was mentioning, you know, folks then getting into it and not realizing how difficult it is or how challenging it is. And that will weed itself out. That is what it is, but it is something that, you know, really honestly, who are we to deny that? And one of the ways that we can share that is through our stories, through our experiences, which thank you so much, both Dewey and Julia Common, for sharing the diversity and the magnitude. Really, I know it was just a little snapshot and scratch the surface of your all's experiences. But that has really been so wonderful to share. And it's great that we're able to share this through our presentations. We have a lot of you know, sort of congratulatory appreciation in the chat and in the comments in the Q&A, thanking you both for such wonderful information. And I want to make sure to share with folks that, and I pulled up my little slideshow here just in time, hopefully, to share with you all that our upcoming conference, and I'm going to put here, where's view? Where's view? I can't see with this thing in the way. Of course, now it's not going to show me. Sorry. I was hoping to put slideshow. There we go. Play from current slide. Thank you to both of you for being here with us tonight. I know we could keep talking all night, especially when we talk about bees, and for those of us who are really sort of involved with them or want to become more involved with them. And we have our 2022 May conference coming up next month, which is actually going to feature our WASP president, Etienne Tardif, with Yukon honey origins and citizen science efforts, and Dr. May Barenbaum from Illinois on honey as a functional food for bees. So really looking forward to next week's talk. And thank you folks for joining tonight. We've gone, you know, definitely a little bit over, but I think it was well worth it. I'm very thankful for folks staying on. Again, here's our website, but if you're here, you probably found that already. And follow us on our social media. We have a wonderful board member named Lisa from, I think Lisa's from Alaska, right? Who does our social media, who handles our social media. So be sure to follow along on there as well. And with that, I will leave it for any closing remarks from either one of you. Julia, do you have some closing remarks?
Thank you for letting me speak. And I hope everyone has a safe season with their bees. That's it.
Dewey, any closing remarks?
I'd also like to say thank you. Thank you very much for allowing us to present this concept. I'm wondering if a regional organization such as WAS would be interested in taking this on as some sort of a study, some sort of a project. There's a fertile ground there to try to make some sense out of all of the people that want to keep bees in the urban area.
Most definitely, data is always welcome. And yeah, we will, Etienne's coming on next month, so we can back him in a corner and ask him if it's something that WAS would like to really look at. And especially with our diverse membership, which we have folks in cities, in rural lands, in wild spaces. We have folks across the board here out in the West. And so very thankful to have the Western Apicultural Society providing information, but also inviting guests from near and far to share information. So thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to our, yeah, go ahead, Julia.
I just want to say thank you to Dewey, because I was a little bit intimidated by Dewey, because he's influenced me in my beekeeping and how I teach. And I have his little, you know, thanks, Dewey. It was really nice working with you. And I felt honored to get to speak while you're speaking too. Thank you.
The honor is all mine, and thank you for joining with me, Julian.
Yeah. Thank you. A new couple walking off into the bee sunset.
You always make good lifelong friends with beekeepers, right? That's the beauty of this industry, really. So thanks everyone for joining us tonight. And thanks to Chris, our tech guy, who we wouldn't be here without. And yeah, join us next month as we welcome our WASP president, Etienne Tardif, and also Dr. May Berenbaum. So we'll see you next month. Thank you.
Night,
Thank
everybody.
you.